district court judge in Colorado hears felonies, cases where you can receive 18 months in jail up to life. Oh, excuse me, up to the death penalty. And civil matters over $15,000. So I've been a county court judge for 3 years. For 21 years before that, I was a juvenile magistrate. And so I was a juvenile judicial officer, and I could do anything that a real judge did, except for jury trials, and I did it for $15,000 less than a real judge does it. So my expertise is really in the area of juvenile justice, but I can talk about DUIs a lot if you want to, and I can talk about domestic violence a lot if you want to, because those are the kind of cases I hear now. Although I heard a prostitution jury trial last week, and I heard an unlawful sexual contact jury trial this week, and my very, very first trial was a dangerous dog trial. So if you want to talk about any of those issues, I can discuss them with you. In 1995, I went to a conference in Reno for judges at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And it was on disproportionate minority confinement. And when I got there, I was young. In comparison to the sea of old white men who are judges, I'm this young female, relatively. And, no, the female part is not relative. The young is relative. I'm in this sea of old white men, and I'm thinking I know more about diversity than any of these men do. And I am positive that every child who comes through the detention center and who ends up in front of me, and that was every child, I'm positive that I treat every child the same regardless of race. I know that I treat girls differently than I treat boys, but that was all research-based. Because with girls, you do relationship stuff, and with boys, you do something different. But I was absolutely positive that based on ethnicity and race, everybody who came through my court got treated exactly the same. And I was there for 3 days, and I realized, and this was in the height of the crack cocaine era for us, I realized that if you were an African-American male and you came into detention on crack cocaine charges, I assumed you were dealing. And because I assumed you were dealing, you got detained, you didn't get a substance abuse evaluation, and you didn't get treatment. If you were a white kid on the exact same charge, I assumed you were using. You got out of detention, you got a substance abuse evaluation, and you got treatment. And I was completely unaware that I was doing that. So I came back to Colorado Springs and I started the Disproportionate Minority Confinement Task Force. Dr. McCord came and joined us soon after and did our very first Train the Trainer for diversity trainers in Colorado Springs at that time. And I've been working on the issue of disproportionate minority confinement since. In Colorado Springs, I put on a conference. We're getting ready for our 5th annual conference. It's called Educating Children of Color, and the purpose is to dismantle the cradle-to-prison pipeline through education for children of color. And over the course of the last 4 years, we've given away $36,000 in scholarship money. We just draw names from the hat and give money to kids who are pregnant. So, disproportionate minority confinement is my passion, but I'm also passionate about juvenile justice in general. And I love statistics. So I'm going to share some statistics with you, which I'm pretty certain most of you know, but I want to remind you. And then I want to talk about legislation that's pending in California right now. Senate Bill 9, which is sponsored by Leland Yee, has been passed through the Senate Committee on Public Safety and is now in front of the Senate Committee on Appropriations and is set for hearing on May 2nd. And I'm going to try to convince you before we're done that you guys should be a voice in terms of passage of Senate Bill 9. Does anyone know what Senate Bill 9 is? No. Okay, you're going to find out. I'm going to talk for a minute about, well, one thing you guys know. Most of you I think most of you have taken Dr. McCord's class. I think you know, or in Dr. McCord's class, I think you already know that disproportionately people of color are affected, adversely affected by the justice system. That outcomes for people of color are dramatically different in the justice system than they are in any other system. But we also know that children of color are more likely to have negative outcomes in foster care, that they're more likely to have negative outcomes in education, and they're more likely to have negative outcomes in the mental health system. And so part of what I am trying to do is convince kids to stay in school, convince kids to read and be college prepared by the time, in math, by the time they get out of school. And that by encouraging and welcoming people to get an education, people who look more like this class than like me end up on my side of the bench instead of as defenders. I think in Colorado Springs, which is a community of 500,000 people, we have 3 African American attorneys. In the state of Colorado, out of all of the judicial bench, all the judges, we only have 3% of our judges are African American. We have a higher percentage of Hispanic judges because we have a higher percentage of Hispanic people in the state of Colorado. But for the most part, people who look just like me, but mostly are male, are the people who are on the bench and not people of color. And we need more lawyers, we need more judges. Most of the high school graduates will perform at 8th grade level, and only 16 of the high school graduates will go to college. Can you see this at all? Okay, good. This statistic is no longer correct. It was that 6 will graduate within 6 years, but recently it became 4 will graduate within 6 years. Oh, dang it. Go back. And 94 or 94% will struggle to earn a living wage in society. That's unacceptable. Every one of those statistics is unacceptable. And at this time, a child who was born in 2001, an African American child who was born in 2001 has a 1 in 3 lifetime likelihood of going to prison. And I believe the statistic in California is that 1 in 3 right now is either in prison, on parole, or on probation. For a Hispanic male, you have a 1 in 6 lifetime likelihood of going to prison, and for a white male, you have a 1 in 17 lifetime likelihood of going to prison. The numbers are dramatically different for women because we just don't go to prison as much. But still, people of color, women of color, are disproportionately impacted, are disproportionately incarcerated. So currently in the United States, there are 2.3 million adults in jail or state prison. And our nationwide state corrections expenditures are $52 billion annually. California state corrections expenditures are $9.8 billion. The number of people in prison in the United States, or the rate of imprisonment in the United States, is higher than any other industrialized nation in the world. And it has increased dramatically since 1980, in part because of the war on drugs, which disproportionately impacts people of color. And I'm going to spend some time on that. And when I know you guys will get tired of hearing me say disproportionate, but I do, and I will continue to. The peak for crime in this country was the early 1990s. Crime has dropped since then, and serious violent crime among juveniles, and I think crime in almost all categories, except for drug offense, has decreased since the 1990s. But our prison population has continued to burgeon despite that. And it's big business. California's total population of incarcerated people is 250,000, 170,000 of whom are in prison, 82,000 are on in jail, 312,000 are on probation, and 106,000 are on parole. An African American in the state of California, the population of prisoners in the state of Colorado is 6.5, the rate of incarceration for an African American male is 6.5 times higher than his white counterpart, his or her white counterpart. And for Hispanics, it's 1.7 times their white counterpart. In Colorado, it's 6.6% for a black individual. And for the entire nation, it's 5.6 times. More than 60% of people in prison now are racial or ethnic minorities. And for black males in their 20s, 1 in 8 is in prison or jail on any given day. And so you might say, well, you might not say, some people might say that it's because black people commit more crimes, and particularly black people commit more drug crimes. So yesterday I was going through a book which I think is critical for everybody to read. It's called The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, and it is about a new caste system that's been created because so many African American individuals have been incarcerated and are unable to vote. And as a result of their disenfranchisement because of felony records, they're unable to impact the communities in which they live in. In addition to which, if they've been convicted of a felony drug crime, they're not eligible for housing, they're not eligible for aid to the needy, TANF, they're not eligible for any welfare program. And so, for the most part, are unable to change their circumstances once they've been labeled as a felon. I don't have to read this to you, I can tell you. What it says specifically is that despite arrests for and incarceration for drug use and drug selling, despite the fact that individuals who are black and brown are the ones who primarily end up in prison on these charges, every bit of evidence indicates that the people who use the most and who deal the most are white people. And so, I think that a study from 2000, this one refers to a study from 2000, said that white students use cocaine at the rate 7 times that of black students, use crack cocaine at 8 times the rate of black students, use heroin at 7 times the rate of black students, and I think everybody uses marijuana at about the same rate. I think, let's see what it says. Nearly identical percentages of white and black high school seniors use marijuana. It also indicated that in this 2000 report that white youth aged 12 to 17 are more than a third more likely to have sold illegal drugs than their African American counterparts. So if the war on drugs is intended to save us from the people who are using and dealing, but most of the people we're locking up are black or brown, then I don't think that it's being applied or the war is being waged equitably. I want to talk specifically about juveniles in custody. Nationwide, 91,000 kids are in custody, and in California, 15,000 children are locked up. In the nation, juveniles who are serving life without parole, there are 25,074, and in California there are 250. Internationally, there are only 7 who are being detained with life without parole internationally. All 7 of them were sentenced in Israel. We are one of 2 nations. Well, actually 10 nations have laws that permit incarcerating juveniles for life without parole. but us in Israel are the only ones who use that law. Okay, I'm going to talk about the road to Senate Bill 94. Does anyone know what Virginia versus Adkins is, which was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2002? Okay. In 1996, Daryl Atkins and a friend went to rob an Air Force employee, and he only had $60. And so they were pissed, and they took him to the ATM and made him withdraw another $200. And he begged for his life, and they decided his life was not worth $260. And they took him to a field, and they shot him 8 times. And all of that was captured, most of what was happening was captured on the ATM video. And so Mr. Atkins was picked up pretty quickly and taken into custody. During the course of the trial, it was determined that Mr. Atkins had an IQ of 59, which indicates that he's mildly mentally retarded. He was convicted and he was sentenced to death. So that was 1996. In 2002, the Supreme Court ruled that you can't put the mentally retarded to death, that they have such diminished mental capacity that it's not serving the purposes of deterrence, because the mentally retarded aren't going to get that if you do this, you're going to be put to death. It's not really serving the mission of retribution, because if you don't understand the consequences of your behavior, being put to death doesn't serve any purpose. And that as a nation, we should be, let me get the exact language. As a nation, the Eighth Amendment should be interpreted in the light of the evolving standards of decency that mark the progress of a maturing society. And so the Supreme Court, in a split decision, ruled that you cannot put the mentally retarded to death. And so what is interesting, though, is that the case was remanded, and some Virginia judge decided that since he'd been hanging out with lawyers, he'd gotten smarter. And so his IQ was over 70 at that point, because everyone knows what a good influence we have on your intellectual stimulation. So they decided his IQ was over 70 and sentenced him to death again. There was a stay of execution, and ultimately there was a new trial, or not a new trial, a new proceeding in front of a different judge, and that judge found that there had been prosecutorial misconduct earlier, and so commuted his sentence to life. But they were going to try to figure out a way to kill Daryl Atkins one way or the other. So in this country now, the mentally retarded cannot be put to death.